the city fell apart. But inside me, something was beginning. A force I'm learning to control.
Before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she will prick her finger on the spindle of the spinning wheel and fall into a sleep like death. A sleep from which she will never awaken.
I've said it before, but it bears repeating here especially. Wizards do magic, but sorcerers are magic. What do I mean by this? Basically, sorcerers are extraordinary individuals who possess innate magical abilities. No cumbersome spell books or daily memorization needed in order for them to cast. They can just do it. Where exactly this amazing ability comes from is up to the DM and the bloodline you pick. But first, let's look at a couple of important details about the sorcerer class. They are a pure mage class. That means they get 9 spell levels, the lowest BAB, and a D6 hit die. Sorcerers are charisma based. That means all of their spells and special abilities run off their charisma modifier. And they have the ability to cast spells spontaneously. As I said, that means that you don't need to choose your spells per day like a wizard would. The other thing you have to know about casting spontaneously is, unlike a wizard who can know any number of spells, you have a very limited list of spells known. As you increase in level, you're going to be adding more spells to your list of spells known, but that's still not going to be very many. What this means for sorcerers is you really can't get into spells which have very limited uses or are more utilitarian. So you want to go with spells which you're going to be able to use and are going to be valuable to you over and over again in most situations. That's things like Mage Armor, Magic Missile, Fireball, Lightning Bolt. When you level up as a sorcerer, you need to look carefully at your spell options and say to yourself, am I going to be able to use this over and over again? If the answer's no, then don't take the spell. At first level, all sorcerers receive eschew materials. This bonus feat removes the material components from spells which cost 1 gold or less, so you don't need to bother buying a material component pouch. One of the other sacrifices you'll need to make if you want to play a sorcerer is your saves are going to be not very good. You have poor reflex saves and poor fortitude saves, and since your spells run off your charisma, you're probably not going to have a very high wisdom modifier, so, all your saves are pretty much no. So, obviously, charisma is your most important stat, and the other stats which are going to be important is largely going to be dependent on your playstyle. Most people who choose to play as sorcerers do so to take advantage of their high arcane damage potential. Now, if this is your plan, you need to remember a few things. Number 1, how exactly you're going to get that damage from you to your opponent, and that's going to influence your spell choice. So, you're going to be wanting to think about ranged touch attacks, or area of effect. If you're planning on using ranged touch attacks, your second most important stat is going to be dexterity, so you have at least an ability to make those. If you want to make melee touch attacks, your most important stat is going to be strength, although you can take the weapon finesse feat. This will let you apply your dexterity modifier to your melee touch attacks, which are kind of a natural weapon, and you can finesse with that. Some of the sorcerer bloodlines give you claws as a weapon, and if you're planning on using those, you want to have a strength modifier, so that would also allow you to make those melee touch attacks fairly easily, in theory. And with AoE and effects which just hit, you don't need to bother with any particular stat if you're going all into that. Alright, so what races are a good choice for your sorcerer? You can't go wrong with human, half-elf, half-orc, and gnome are also excellent choices. If you're planning on a compulsion specialist, may I recommend one of my favorite races, the Kitsune. And you'll also have good results with Dhampir or Catfolk. Basically, any race which gets a bonus to charisma is going to be a good choice for a sorcerer. However, races which take a hindrance to charisma, dwarves, are not really good choices for this class. Alright, now let's dig into basically the defining feature of the sorcerer, the bloodline. The bloodline is basically the source of the sorcerer's casting ability. Now, this can mean basically a very literal interpretation of what the bloodline means. You're related by blood to one of these powerful magical entities. Like the arcane bloodline, for example. One of your ancestors might have been a powerful archmage. Or if you have the Fey bloodline, one of your ancestors could have been a fairy. However, that's by no means the only way that this amazing ability could have entered your family tree. You could have a draconic sorcerer with an ancestor who was a great dragon slayer, and he ate the heart of a dragon to give himself superhuman power, and that got passed on to the sorcerer. The father of an elemental sorcerer could have accidentally blundered onto one of the elemental planes. Or the mother of an aberrant sorcerer could have had a curse placed on them by some sort of sinister entity from the Dark Tapestry. There are all kinds of different RP ways you can flavor this. So anyway, your sorcerer bloodline will give you a number of important things. It will give you bonus spells, bonus feats, an additional class skill, a passive buff called the Bloodline Arcana, and a number of bloodline powers that you're going to get as you level up. Now, certain bloodlines are definitely better than others, and here's my list of some bloodlines which I think have merit. First off, there's the Aberrant. As you increase in level, this is going to give you an extended reach on your melee touch attacks. You'll also gain an ability to have crits just fail on you a certain percentage of the time. It starts at 25% and goes up to 50%, I suppose, because your organs or whatever aren't where they're supposed to be. The Abyssal Bloodline is one of the best. It gives you Demonic Claws, which will increase in damage from a D4 to a D6, and finally, 1d6 claw damage and 1d6 fire damage. Also, as you increase in level, you'll get bonuses to strength. This will really potentially increase your ability to hit with your claws and the damage that you do with them, especially if you do something like a multi-class with something that has a higher base attack bonus. The Arcane Bloodline gives you the ability to increase the DC of spells you cast that have a Metamagic feat applied to them. You also gain an Arcane Bond, just like a wizard, and more spells. That can be very helpful. Draconic is another really good bloodline. It gives you claws, just like the Abyssal, breath weapons, and natural armor. You'll also have the ability to increase the amount of damage you do with elemental-based spells, depending on which dragon lineage you go with. It adds on 1 point of damage per damage die. As an example, if you're playing a gold dragon lineage sorcerer and you cast a fireball, for each d6 you'll add +1 damage, and that can really add up. The elemental sorcerer I would really only recommend for the passive buff, the Bloodline Arcana, which is fantastic. It gives you the ability to change the type of elemental damage that the spells you cast do to the type of element that you're associated with. So, lightning bolts can become fire bolts. Scorching rays can become acid rays. There is just a world of possibilities. If you are planning an enchantment specialist, definitely go with the Fey Bloodline. It increases the DC of enchantment spells that you cast by 2. Alright, now let's talk about metamagic feats. If you're going to be applying a metamagic feat to your sorcerer, because you cast spontaneously, that means you have a small list of spells known that you can pick and choose which one you want to cast when you want to cast it. Anyway, when you cast one of these and you apply a metamagic feat, it increases the casting time from a standard action to a full round action. Now, if the spell has a longer casting time than a standard action, you still have to factor in that increased casting time, but it really doesn't matter. Alright, finally, one of the other limitations of the sorcerer class is that you do have such a small number of spells. That's one of the good reasons to take the human, because their favored class bonus is that they can add 1 additional spell to their spell list of one spell lower than the highest level that they can cast. Say you can cast level 2 spells. You would have to add an additional level 1 spell to your spell list. Now, if you're interested in more character builds and class analysis for Pathfinder and D&D, check out D6 Damage right here on YouTube. Thank you for watching.